We've been taught that motivation is the spark, that unless you feel it, you can't move. But the truth is far more powerful, far more raw, and far more uncomfortable. Motivation isn't something you wait for, it's something you train. Motivation is not magic. It's molecular, and at the center of it is a single chemical, dopamine. This is not the reward molecule. It is the pursuit molecule. It is what drives forward action, what fuels ambition, what awakens the warrior within the nervous system. Every goal you have, every dream you carry, every ounce of grit you admire in others, all of it is traced back to this one force pulsing through your brain, not when you receive the prize, but when you are in motion toward it. You don't need more inspiration. You need to master this system. Because once you do, you don't wait to feel ready. You train your brain to move even in the absence of ease. When dopamine is properly directed, it transforms pain into progress. It makes the grind meaningful. It takes what others run from fatigue, repetition, challenge, and turns it into fuel. You can sit in the fire longer. You can see clearer under pressure. You can delay gratification not because you're superhuman, but because your biology has been recalibrated to value the pursuit, not just the prize. That is the shift that breaks the cycle of mediocrity. That is the shift that rewires your identity. Because the brain doesn't just release dopamine when you succeed, it releases it when it believes success is near. And if you place meaning on the process, if you declare with full force that the battle itself is sacred, your nervous system begins to believe you. And then it begins to change. Dopamine moves in anticipation. The moment you create a vision and move toward it, this chemical system activates. It surges through the midbrain, through the striatum, through the circuits of action and desire. It says to the body, pursue, press on, pay attention. And when you celebrate small efforts, when you reinforce the discipline, when you find significance in every rep, every page, every act of stillness, your brain doesn't just feel better. It rewires, it becomes a machine for consistency. This isn't theory. This is neurobiology, and it means you are not dependent on outside energy. You are not waiting on external fire. You are the fire because the source lives within. The tragedy is that most people burn out not because they worked too hard, but because they tied their dopamine to the wrong things. They only feel driven when there's applause, when there's results, when someone sees them. But the ones who last, the ones who endure, are the ones who have learned to attach dopamine to obedience, to effort, to what no one sees but heaven. That is the holy discipline. That is how you walk through silence with thunder in your soul. That is how you stay in the dark long enough for light to break through. Your brain listens to what you reward. And if you reward the path, if you praise the process, the path itself becomes the reward. And when that happens, nothing can stop you. Because motivation won't be a feeling you chase, it will be a system you command. You were not born to wait for dopamine, you were born to train it. The most powerful shift in human performance happens the moment you realize that dopamine, the molecule of drive and pursuit, does not have to be tied to a result. It can be tied to the process, to the pain, to the ordinary moments of effort that no one sees. And when that happens, when your nervous system begins to release reward not from achieving, but from enduring, you become untouchable. You're no longer chasing outcomes. You are fed by the journey itself. This is how warriors are forged. This is how the elite separate from the average, not in talent, but in how they have trained their reward systems to fall in love with the fight. Every time you step into discomfort willingly, your brain is watching. Every repetition, every act of quiet consistency, every morning you rise without applause and choose the hard road anyway, your dopamine system is being shaped. Most people believe the brain rewards comfort, but it doesn't. It rewards forward action. It rewards courage. It rewards the body that moves even when the soul feels dry. And the way to train it is not through hacks or hype, but through intention and repetition. Tie your dopamine to effort, and your motivation becomes renewable. Your energy stops crashing. You stop needing validation. You become a source, not a seeker. Biologically, when you anticipate meaning in the process, dopamine is released. It doesn't wait for the finish line. It surges during the work. When you say, "This is hard, but I was made for this," your brain responds. It doesn't need you to be emotional. It needs you to be consistent. It needs a signal, and that signal comes when you declare that the struggle matters, when you hold your posture in pain, when you control your breath in the heat, when you attach value to what feels invisible to the world. Your chemistry listens, and then it rewires. This is not motivational speech. This is hard science wrapped in sacred discipline. Your brain is plastic. It changes based on what you repeatedly do. And when you reward effort with attention, with gratitude, with purpose, your brain begins to crave that state. The grind stops feeling like death and starts to feel like destiny. You want to be disciplined. Train your dopamine system to respond to the unseen. You want to be consistent. Link your reward to the action itself. You want to be unstoppable. Stop waiting for finish lines and start celebrating footsteps. This is the separation. The world chases results, but the leaders, the builders, the unshakable, have trained themselves to find energy in the middle. That's why they don't burn out. That's why they rise when others fall, because their motivation is not external. It's chemical, it's spiritual, it's forged in obedience, not outcomes. And once your brain learns to crave the path, not just the prize, you become immune to failure. Because even the hard days feed you, even the silence speaks, even the battle becomes beautiful movement, creates motivation. That's the truth buried beneath all the lies we've been told. We think motivation is a prerequisite, that we need to feel ready before we act, feel inspired before we begin. But the biology says the opposite. The circuitry of the brain that governs motivation is activated by forward action, not the other way around. When you move your body, even slightly, even reluctantly, you trigger the very chemistry that makes further action possible. Dopamine begins to rise, norepinephrine begins to sharpen your focus, and momentum is born not because of a spark, but because of a step. The mind does not wait for clarity, it follows cues, and movement is the loudest cue you can give. When you sit still, when you hesitate, when you stay in comfort, your brain reads that as retreat. It quiets the systems of pursuit. But when you move, when you walk into the gym, when you open the book, when you stand tall in the middle of chaos, your biology changes. And that change is not emotional, it is neurochemical. The very act of forward motion releases molecules that signal the brain, we are in pursuit, now supply the energy. This is how discipline overtakes doubt. You do not need to feel strong to act strong. You need to move your body in alignment with the mission. Because the nervous system responds to posture, to motion, to breathe. You take a step, the brain takes notice. You keep walking, the brain rewards the effort. It's not about giant leaps. It's about consistent forward signaling. And that signaling rewires the way you experience effort itself. You begin to crave what you used to avoid. You begin to focus under pressure because your brain has learned motion means meaning. Even on the days when everything feels heavy, when motivation feels like a memory, the smallest movement can be the opening. You don't need to feel like it, you need to act like it, and once you act, your chemistry catches up. This is not theory. This is neurobiology. The action drives the activation. And when you repeatedly practice motion in the absence of motivation, you build a brain that moves regardless of mood. You build resilience not just in spirit, but in circuitry. The greatest mistake is waiting to feel right before you move. The truth is, you must move to feel right. That one decision to step, to breathe, to act, turns the whole system on. It tells the midbrain to release dopamine. It activates the prefrontal cortex to organize your thoughts. It calms the limbic system that screams for comfort. That one step becomes a signal of identity, and the more often you send that signal, the more automatic it becomes. You want to be dangerous in this world. Train yourself to act without needing a reason. Move before the mind negotiates. Lead with motion, and the mind will follow, because motion is the motivation. And once you understand that, you stop waiting and start winning. Motivation is not a mood. It is a state of the nervous system, and that state is shaped by the fundamentals: sleep, light, and physical movement. You cannot expect your brain to fire on all cylinders when the biological systems that fuel it are broken. If you are sleep deprived, you are chemically sabotaged. If you avoid sunlight, you dull the natural rhythm that drives energy and clarity. If your body remains idle, your mind will too. These are not small details, they are the foundation. You don't build mental strength on mental hacks. You build it on biological alignment. When you sleep well in 90-minute cycles, consistent timing, deep phases of REM and slow wave, your brain cleans itself. Your dopamine receptors reset. Your emotional circuits stabilize. You don't just feel better. You become more focused, more disciplined, more immune to chaos. The brain resets its readiness through sleep. And when you rob yourself of that, no amount of willpower can compensate. You're walking into war with no armor, and still, people wonder why they burn out. It's not because they're weak. It's because their biology is begging for repair. Then there's light, not just any light, morning light. Natural sunlight into the eyes within the first hour of waking triggers a cascade of neurological and hormonal activation. It anchors your circadian rhythm, boosts cortisol at the right time, and primes dopamine for the rest of the day. It is the biological switch from night to day, from rest to pursuit. Miss that, and your internal systems remain sluggish. Delay it and your drive stays dim, but catch it even for 5 minutes, and the brain begins to organize itself around forward motion. And movement, not just for the body, but for the brain. Physical activity increases brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, a molecule that rewires your brain to grow, adapt, and fire more effectively. When you move the body, you activate clarity, you generate momentum, you elevate baseline dopamine, and make focus more sustainable. You don't need to crush your body, but you do need to engage it, walk, train, sweat, signal to your biology that you're here to act. The tragedy is, most people try to solve motivation at the surface with quotes, with hype, with pressure. But the solution is deep. It's cellular. You fix your rhythm, your light exposure, your sleep, your movement, and motivation begins to rise, not from will, but from wiring. You become reliable because your body is regulated. You become consistent because your system is clean. And once your biology is aligned, you no longer chase energy, you carry it. These are not tricks, these are laws. Break them and you will struggle. Honor them and your mind becomes a weapon. It begins to anticipate challenge instead of avoiding it. It wakes up ready. It holds the line longer. And when others are falling apart, yours will still be standing because you built it on something unshakable. Stress, when used properly, is not your enemy, it is your training ground. The system that most people run from is the same system that builds the strongest minds on the planet. When stress enters the body, when your heart rate climbs, your breath shortens, your pupils dilate, your biology is preparing you, not punishing you. The brain doesn't distinguish between fear and focus until you tell it what the moment means. And if you meet that stress with stillness, with intention, with breath, you shift it from destruction to development. You turn it from a storm into structure, because inside that heat is where the wiring changes. Cortisol, the stress hormone, is not evil. It's a signal. It rises when the brain detects challenge, and its job is to prepare you for forward motion. But without proper context, without a trained response, it floods the system and paralyzes progress. That's why people crumble under pressure, not because they're incapable, but because their biology was never taught what to do with the fire. But fire doesn't only burn, it forges. When you engage with stress instead of retreating, your nervous system starts to adapt. It says, "We've been here, we can handle this." And in that decision, you shift the circuitry of fear into the circuitry of control. Stress is a doorway. Walk through it often enough with the right tools, and the response becomes automatic. You feel the pressure rise, and instead of panic, you feel presence. That's not a mindset shift, that's a neural shift. The amygdala becomes quieter. The prefrontal cortex, the seat of reason and strategy, remains active. Your breath slows, your perception narrows, your body enters the state of hyperperformance not in spite of stress, but because of it. You no longer resist the weight, you lift it, and every time you do, your threshold expands. Even temporary short-term stress, when met intentionally, releases molecules like norepinephrine and epinephrine that sharpen attention, increase energy, and enhance memory. That is why the hardest moments can be your most defining. Your brain becomes malleable in the fire. What you practice under pressure becomes your identity under peace. That's how real motivation is built, not in comfort, but in the consistency of forward motion through chaos. The people you admire, the ones who don't flinch, who stay steady when everything's on fire, they weren't born that way. They were trained by stress, they used it, they leaned in, and every time they survived it, their nervous system stored the lesson. That's what you must do: lean in, use the pressure as feedback, use the fire as focus. The goal is not to avoid stress. The goal is to teach your body what to do with it. Because once your system knows how to regulate, recover, and respond, stress becomes your signal to rise, not retreat. You no longer wait to feel safe. You act with precision even when you don't. Relying on motivation is the fastest way to stay weak. Because motivation is a feeling, and feelings are unstable. Some days it's there, some days it's gone. And if your pursuit of growth is tied to how you feel, you will collapse the moment resistance rises. The truth is, motivation cannot be trusted. It's too inconsistent, too fragile, too reactive. What you need is something stronger. Something biological, something built, and that something is a system, a ritual, a structure, a code of behavior that does not ask for your permission. It just activates. The most disciplined people in the world aren't motivated every day, they're wired. Their nervous system has been trained to move regardless of emotion. They don't wait to feel ready, they've built systems that start the moment the alarm hits. The shoes go on, the journal opens, the cold water hits their skin. These systems bypass emotion. They signal the brain it's time to act, not because you feel like it, but because this is who you are. That signal, repeated daily, becomes identity, and identity is more powerful than inspiration. The brain craves automation. It wants patterns, and every time you repeat a behavior at the same time, in the same way, with the same intention, you're carving neural grooves that reduce resistance. What was once effort becomes natural. What was once discipline becomes default. But that only happens if you build the scaffolding. If you stop chasing motivation and start engineering consistency, you set the time, you set the place. You lock in your ritual, and you do it whether the fire is there or not. Systems remove negotiation. They remove debate. You're not asking yourself if you should work, train, write, study. You're just doing what the system demands. And that action, even in low states, begins to generate chemistry. Dopamine rises, focus returns, confidence builds. Not because you waited, but because you moved. And every time you move in the absence of motivation, you're strengthening your ability to override weakness. That is how the mind becomes disciplined, through daily obedience, not occasional emotion. The greatest myth is that high performers are highly motivated. They're not, they're highly structured. They've replaced chaos with order. They've replaced randomness with rhythm. And their system is sacred. It protects their energy. It preserves their bandwidth. It gives their nervous system the cues it needs to enter performance mode without needing hype, without needing feeling, without needing external fire. If you want to rise, build the system. Build it when it's quiet. Build it when no one's watching. Build it when it's hard. And then let the system carry you through every storm, because storms will come, and motivation will vanish. But if the structure is there, you'll move anyway, you'll rise anyway, you'll conquer anyway, not because of emotion, but because your system makes you unstoppable.